Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to those of you who did submit questions in advance. That really helped me put together what I hope is going to be a useful session for you all. My name's Alison. I am the Sleep Services Manager at Sleep Scotland. For those of you who don't know, Sleep Scotland is a charity that has been around since 1998 to support children and young people with their sleep. And increasingly over the years, teenage sleep has been something that we're all very aware of that is really important and can be quite challenging, actually. So hopefully this will be useful. What Lauren's going to do after the session is also send you a handout just with all the information that's in here. So don't worry about taking loads and loads of notes. Feel free to if you want to, but if you'd rather just sit and listen, that's fine. And just to give you a heads up, I am aware that when people talk about sleep for 40 minutes, you start to feel a little bit sleepy, and that's totally normal. So if you find yourself yawning or your head nodding, I can't see you anyway, but I definitely wouldn't be offended. So this is the bit I'd like to use the wee Q&A box for, is if you can have a think about how you feel when you don't get enough sleep. So whether that's one night of poor sleep or whether that's the series of nights of poor sleep, how do you feel? How does that affect you?
I do know, Alison, there is a delay. So if people are popping in the questions here, oh, we've got something coming up now, I think.
Feel free to jump in with your own while we're waiting for them.
So I'm going to steal Donna's one.
Yeah.
No. But yeah, grumpy probably is and a short temper probably. And probably I don't. I'm quite quiet when I it's probably avoiding communication.
Fair enough.
Oh, we've got some coming through now.
Right.
So we've got, oh yeah, grumpy, someone else is with me. Sarah has said groggy, brain fog, sorry, physically tired, and someone else has said moody and extra hungry.
Oh yes, all of these things, absolutely. So common when we're feeling that we just haven't had enough sleep, or that even if we have slept for the amount of time we think we should sleep, that maybe that sleep wasn't good quality sleep. So we might feel worn out, lacking energy, motivation. We might actually be more clumsy or accident prone if we're sleep deprived. And actually, if we're thinking about our teenagers are almost notorious for being really clumsy, and there's something about their limbs are getting longer and they've got hormones going everywhere, but actually sleep deprivation can just make that so much worse. Grumpy, that key one that always comes up, just feeling short-tempered. You might lose patience, you might snap at somebody for no apparent reason, and later on think, God, why did I even do that? You could act more impulsively, and again, thinking about our teenagers just behaving in a way that we think is just really irrational. And actually, is it something that we could link back to them not sleeping very well? We have stronger, less controllable emotions, and it can really affect our mood. It can leave us with low mood, it can leave us feeling more anxious, and it can leave us feeling more stressed. None of those are particularly cheerful things, and I'm not saying that to freak you out as a parent of a young person who maybe isn't sleeping very well, you know, the reason that you're here. But actually, they're good takeaway messages to take home with you if you're talking to your young person about getting a better night's sleep, and they don't necessarily see the point of it. Is actually, you've said that you've been feeling really anxious, or you've been feeling that you've been falling out with your friends, or you've been feeling like you just haven't got the energy to do anything. Actually, if we got you sleeping a bit better, maybe those things would improve. It's finding the carrot rather than the stick. I find often with teenagers is what's their motivation for wanting to get a better night's sleep, because it's not the same as when they were 5 or 6 and maybe you told them to go to bed and they would. Maybe depends on your 5 or 6 year old, I suppose, but having that can really be helpful. The other thing that can be helpful is just actually understanding what happens when we sleep. we don't just go to bed, sleep for 8, 9, 10 hours and then wake up and nothing's happened. Actually, our body and brain are very busy in that time. So throughout life, from baby right through to old age, we release growth hormone while we're sleeping. For your teens, they're building their muscle mass, their bone intensity is increasing, they're going to get taller, they're going to get stronger, all while they're sleeping. It repairs and renews cells. So if we've cut ourselves, we scratched ourselves, that kind of renewal will be happening. It's also when our hair grows and when our nails grow. Strengthens our immune system. There's lots of research that says that if you're not sleeping well, you're more likely to catch things like colds, and those colds are more likely to last longer. There's also some evidence that suggests that the benefits of things like vaccines are more effective if we're sleeping well. And hormones are released to maintain a healthy appetite. It was mentioned in the chat there that somebody said that they feel more hungry if they've not slept very well. And actually that's because the hormones that balance when we feel hungry and when we feel full actually are a little bit out of kilter when we're not sleeping very well. So we produce a lot more of the hormone that makes us feel hungry. And because we're low energy and we're sleep deprived, we go for the high fat, the high sugar foods. And the other side of it is memory consolidation. Obviously really, really important for your teenagers as they're learning and developing. It's basically your brain is like a filing cabinet and it takes all of the memories from the day and it sorts through all the rubbish, gets rid of that, takes those short-term memories it wants to store and stores it into long-term. So our body and brain development are maximised when we're sleeping well. And again, I'm not saying this to stress you out if your young person isn't sleeping very well. It's just something else to think about if you're talking to them about sleep and things that might encourage them to want to change their sleep habits. So they're reporting that they're struggling at school. Well, actually, your memory might improve if you were sleeping well. You say you've been catching more colds or feeling more ill. Again, that immune system strengthening could be something that encourages them to want to improve their sleep. So how's sleep actually built up? What does it look like? So this is a graph called a hypnogram. Those of you who maybe have something like a Fitbit that monitors your sleep might have seen something like this before. So if we look at our hypnogram, this shows a period of 9 hours, which is a sort of typical teenager getting their full night's sleep and going through all of the sleep stages they might need. So if we start at the beginning, I don't know, can you see I'm looking to Lauren to give me a nod. Can you see my mouse on the screen?
I think, yeah, I think we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at the start of the night, we start off awake, and then we go into our lighter stages of sleep and then to our deeper stages of sleep and have a nice big chunk of deep sleep. And this is when we produce a lot of our growth hormone, do a lot of our repair and our renewal. We come up through those lighter stages and have a little bit of what we call Rem sleep. A lot of people know Rem sleep as our dreaming sleep. It's when we do a lot of our dreaming. It's also really important for memory consolidation and also for that emotional regulation. So that's why if we don't get a lot of Rem sleep, we tend to feel more emotional. We'll then go back through our lighter stages and have another little chunk of deep sleep. And then as we come up through that, after that first third of the night, that's all of our deep sleep done. That's often, many people will say, oh, well, I can sleep for 3 or 4 hours, absolutely fine, but then I'm awake through the night. That kind of is understandable because in our deeper stages of sleep, it is much harder to wake us up. And then you'll see as the night goes on, we have longer and longer periods of Rem sleep, really important for that memory consolidation and that emotional regulation. What you'll also see is these little moments of wakefulness. It's absolutely normal to wake through the night. Again, from baby right through to old age, everybody wakes through the night. Ideally, what happens is we turn over, we go back to sleep. We don't even know that we've done it a lot of the time. What can happen though with these wakenings is if something in our environment has changed. So if there was a light on that's then off, or there's a door was open and is now closed, or it was noisy when we went to sleep and now it's quiet. Those kind of things can set off our fight or flight and will make us wake up and think, right, I must wake up. There's danger. I need to check it out. Unfortunately for our teenagers, natural part of their sleep physiology is also that these natural awakenings last that little bit longer. And then what happens is we start to think about something, feel a little bit stressed, and then can't get back to sleep. Some of you might recognise that for the late awakening, if you wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning and then you start thinking about work, or you start thinking about the jobs you have to do the next day, and then that's it, you're not getting back to sleep that night. It's actually one of your natural night awakenings, and unfortunately your brain's then kicked in. So finding a way to distract yourself and try and turn over and get back to sleep is the best thing you can do. For a lot of our teenagers, if they could get this whole chunk of sleep, they'd be absolutely fine, get through all their sleep stages, and they'd wake up feeling refreshed. Unfortunately, what happens for a lot of them is they're maybe going to sleep at midnight, 1 AM, and then they're having to get up at 7 o'clock to get to school. So actually they're missing out on this big chunk of REM at the end of the day. So they're missing out on that memory consolidation, but also that emotional regulation. So they're more likely to feel more hormonal, more emotional. Stroppy is a word that I sometimes hear from parents, because they've missed out on that. If they're going to bed even later than that, and it's sort of the early hours of the morning, and it's 3.5, 4 hours later, you're trying to wake them up for school. If you look at this hypnogram, of course they're not going to wake up, because they're going to be in a very deep stage of sleep. So you can shake them and you can turn the lights on and you can poke them and try and move them around, but actually they are going to struggle to wake up when it's when they're in that deep stage of sleep. But what do we need to actually get a good night's sleep? So the first thing we need to think about is that both our brain and body need to be ready for bed. And so many of us think that actually we can be really active right up to bedtime, turn the light off, get into bed and fall asleep. And for most people, that won't work. So we need to be tired enough. We need to have been awake for long enough and active for long enough to feel tired. So if you're getting up early in the morning and you've got a good routine and you're doing lots of interesting things through the day and you're getting a bit of exercise, generally when you get to bedtime, you will feel tired. However, if you're staying in bed till midday, maybe even later, and then trying to go to bed at 10 o'clock, you haven't been awake for long enough. So most adults need to be awake around 15 to 16 hours in the day before they can then go to sleep at night. And for teenagers, it's not much less. So actually that getting up time and what you're doing during the day is just as important as actually the time that you go to bed. The other thing that affects it is our body clock. So our body clock helps us expect to do certain things throughout the day. So if it's set properly, basically we know that now I need to be awake. Okay, now I should expect things like meals. Now I should expect to be active. Okay, now it's nighttime, I should expect to be tired. And we set our body clock by following a regular daily routine, which is why most of your teenagers will find that their routine goes a bit out the window at times like the summer holidays, because that's a huge chunk of time where actually their routine's gone out the window. They maybe sleep in a little bit later, they're not doing their regular activities, and it can really quite quickly change their body clock and become unset essentially. And the final thing is the environment. Our bedroom needs to be a relaxed, calm and comfortable place. A lot of our teenagers, their bedroom is actually where they do their schoolwork, where they do their socializing. Some of them will eat in there. It's, you know, it's like a bed sit for so many of our young people. So actually thinking about their bedroom as only a sleep space can be really essential if they're not getting a good night's sleep. Another area that's quite important is actually some hormones that are affecting our sleep and wake. And the two that I'm going to talk about are melatonin and cortisol. And they are hormones that are produced in response to a change from either light to dark or dark to light. So the first, which is a response from dark to light, is cortisol. Wakes us up and inhibits sleep. We all need cortisol in our bloodstream, otherwise we wouldn't be here now. It keeps us going, we produce it throughout the day, but it's also produced in response to stress. Stress is such a negative word, but actually we need some stress in our lives. So stress could also include something that's just stimulating or exciting, having a really engaging conversation with somebody, doing some exercise. These are all forms of stress that produce cortisol. Another thing that is a form of stress that produces cortisol is actually sleep deprivation. So if your teenager is not sleeping well, they produce more cortisol, which then keeps them awake for longer. Our sleepy hormone, produced in the response from light to dark, is melatonin. It doesn't put us to sleep, it just makes us feel sleepy. We all produce melatonin. I speak to many parents who they've maybe heard of pharmaceutical melatonin that you could get from the doctor, and they think, oh, well, it's because my child doesn't produce melatonin. Very, very rarely do children or adults not produce melatonin. Usually it's something that's affecting their melatonin production. That is meaning it's not doing its job. And melatonin can be very easily suppressed or disrupted, usually by having too much cortisol in our system. So if we do something really exciting before bed, if we're playing video games or we're out chatting to our friends or anything like that, we're producing cortisol because our brain thinks, well, I need to be awake. So therefore, our melatonin is suppressed. We don't feel sleepy. If we think about it for a 24-hour period, we have this nice big burst of cortisol. If we follow the red line, nice big burst of cortisol in the morning, wakes us up, get us going, ready for the day. If our body clock is set properly, we'll have a nice height of cortisol in the sort of late morning. We'll then experience a little bit of a dip. Some of you might know it as the post-lunch slump. Mine hits about 2 p.m. So if anyone ever asked me to do any sort of presentation in the afternoon, I think, oh, it's no good for me. It's when my cortisol dip hits. Really what I will need to be doing is walking about, doing something active, doing something engaging. Then later on, sort of early evening, we'll have a bit of a second wind, little more burst of cortisol, gets us through to the evening, and then ideally what happens is our cortisol dips nice and low through the evening, ready to rise again the next morning to get us going for the next day. While this is all happening, if we look at this green line, our melatonin levels are fairly low throughout the day, and then we have a bit of a peak as our cortisol levels are coming down to help us get off to sleep. It's actually quite a short peak. It's about 20 minutes. If you've ever sat maybe watching TV or reading a book and you feel your eyes going, you feel your head going, and you think, oh, I'll just finish this episode and I'll go to bed. And then the episode finishes and you go up to bed and brush your teeth and get in your pajamas and get into bed and think, oh, well, I'm wide awake now. That was your melatonin peak. That was it. It's that brief. Doesn't mean it's impossible to get to sleep if you miss it, because people miss it all the time. It's a bit easier if you were already in bed with your lights out when that melatonin peak hit. You'd find it much easier to fall asleep. And then another thing I just want to mention is our body temperature, because that can play a key part in our ability to get to and stay asleep. So our body temperature is fairly steady through the day, and it naturally drops quite low into the early hours of the morning, and then rises in as we get into the morning as a signal to our brain to release cortisol. So it dips at the start of the evening, sends that signal to the brain to release melatonin, and then rises again in the morning to release our cortisol. If the room is too warm through the night, or maybe your teenager wraps themselves in lots of blankets or has very warm pajamas, or if they've got any sensory sensitivities and they like to be maybe under a heavier blanket or a heavier cover, and then you find that in the middle of the night they've thrown everything on the floor, they're more likely then for their brain to think, oh, it must be the morning because I'm warm, because my temperature's risen, so it must be time to release cortisol. So it's just worth thinking about if you do find that your teenager maybe wakes through the night and then they seem to be wide awake and buzzing. Actually, is the room too warm? Is something about the bedroom affecting their ability to stay asleep? Please do put sort of questions and things as we go through, and if there's anything that I can get to towards the end, then we will. So the next thing to think about is just our body clock, which I mentioned before. We need our body clock to be set in order to sleep well. The other name you might have heard for it is our circadian rhythm. And as I said, it helps us to expect to do certain things at different times of the day. And we can set our body clock by following a regular routine. And our body clock is affected by external factors, which are known as Zeitgebers. You don't have to remember that word. It's just kind of fun to say. That's why I always say it, always have it in my presentations. It's a German word. It means time givers. And essentially, it's anything that sets our body clock. So most of you know that light is a really important Zeitgeber, even if you didn't know that was the word for it, that affects our body clock. Our body and our brain expect it to be light during the day and dark at night. And if for some reason it's not, then it starts to mess with our body clock. Unfortunately, we live in Scotland. You're all up in Aberdeen, And actually, you can have very, very long days where it's very light for a long period of time, and also very short days where it's dark for most of the time. And that can really start to affect your body clock, which is why you might find that your sleep is affected differently in the summer to maybe the winter. Obviously, we need to think about things like temperature. As I said, it needs to be cold in the evening, but it can be warm during the day. Bit of a nightmare in the summer if it does get a bit warm and it's stuffy at night time. That can explain why you might find it more difficult to get to sleep and stay asleep. We expect meals at certain times of the day. So if your teenager is a bit of a grazer and tends to just sleep through the morning and then doesn't really eat anything till night time and then eats a lot all in one go, actually they're not helping their body clock to understand what time of day it is and if they should be expecting to be awake or to be asleep. And also the activity we do can really affect our body clock. And I will come on to that a little bit more later. But how much sleep should we actually be getting? So there are different theories and thoughts on how much sleep we should be getting. For many years, there was this idea of a very prescriptive amount of sleep that, you know, a 5-year-old should have X, a 15-year-old should have Y. But we've come to realise that actually we're all a little bit different physiologically. So one 13-year-old might need a very different amount from another 13-year-old, and that's just normal for them. What we want is that once you've slept through the night, that actually you're waking feeling refreshed and you're ready to start the day. That's that you know you're having enough. But just to give you sort of a vague idea, our primary age children might need anywhere between 9 and 11. Some might need a little bit more. Our teenagers, anywhere between 8 and 10. Again, some might need a little bit more. And adults, we're looking at between 7 and 8. Some might be okay with 6. It's not really recommended to have less than that if you can, but it can be quite a difference. And again, one 13-year-old might need a different amount to another 13-year-old, and it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It's just normal for them. Now, our poor teenagers get a bit of a bad rep when it comes to sleep. Oh, they're so lazy. They won't go to bed. They go to bed really late. They're making loads of noise around the house. I don't know what to do about them. They're sleeping all morning. But actually, physiologically, our sleep is different when we're teenagers. So adolescent sleep is counted from 12 right through till about 25. So actually, you're not going to see that shift to adult sleep until well into their 20s. They need around 8 to 10 hours, which is a little bit less than they needed as children, but probably more than they will need as adults. But their body clock naturally shifts by up to 2 hours, which means their melatonin production is not happening until much later on than even it will when they're adults. So whereas an adult might say, well, I need to go to bed at 10:30, 11 o'clock, your teenager might not feel tired until 11:30, midnight. And actually, that's when it starts to become a bit of a problem within the household. And if they try to go to bed too early, they just end up lying awake, feeling awake, and then start to stress about not being able to get to sleep, and then continue to not be able to sleep. Teenagers are actually also more sensitive to the effect of blue light from screens. So a lot of us know that light is a spectrum of colours, and blue light in those screens can affect our ability to sleep. But also the stimulating activities that they're involved with keeps their mind busy, and it means that they're falling asleep later and later, and it shifts their body clock even more than their natural physiological body clock. So actually for our teenagers, that routine is probably even more important than it was when they were children, and more important than it will be when you get into adulthood. If we're thinking about that light, melatonin production is switched off by blue light, but actually probably even more important is just the cortisol levels that you're producing by being engaged in screens. If you're playing a really exciting video game right before bed, the last thing your brain is then going to think is, I should be falling asleep. You'll see on this graph on the very bottom, the point of blue light that has the biggest impact on melatonin is actually quite in line with the blue light that's coming from screens. Now, a lot of our teenagers will say, oh, I'll just put my blue light filter on my screen, which is fine. You know, it's great. It takes the blue light away, so they're less likely to have that effect. But actually, if they're still involved in some exciting activity, they're still engaged in social media, they're chatting, they're playing video games, actually the cortisol level is going to be more of a problem, and that's the thing that's going to shut off their melatonin rather than the light itself. Something somebody asked me about was letting their young person having a lie-in at the weekend because they've not slept well during the week. And what I generally say to that is, unfortunately, having a lie-in, and I'm never popular when I say this to anybody, but we're essentially giving ourselves jet lag. It's what we call social jet lag. And depending on how long you are lying in at the weekend, it can be as much of a difference as having a transatlantic flight. So you're disrupting your body clock. Your body clock stops being aware of what time it needs to go to bed and wake up because you've had a late night on Friday night, and then you've slept in Saturday morning, and then you have another late night Saturday night, and then you sleep in Sunday morning, and then come Sunday night, you go to bed at the time you have to go to bed to get up for school, and you can't get to sleep because your body clock's like, but it's not time for bed yet, because the past 2 nights we've gone to bed 3 hours later than this, so I'm not tired. You're not getting any melatonin production from me. So we have that shift in our body clock. And those of you who have done any travel will know it can take several days to then get your body clock back to the time zone that you need it to be on in the new place that you are. So if you do that every weekend, and then you spend Monday, Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday trying to get yourself back to your normal body clock, shifted to the right time pattern, you're then nearly at Friday, and then you're doing it all over again. So just every week and weekend, you're putting your body through this body clock jet lag effect. And that impacts on your ability to fall asleep. It means that you sleep less, and it means that it's more difficult to wake up in the morning. The other thing to be aware of is you can't really catch up on sleep. It might mean that you feel less tired if you sleep for longer, but it doesn't mean that you make up for the lost sleep that you've had. So you're much better to get into a regular routine so you're sleeping a good amount through the week as well as the weekend. Something else you'll all be aware of is just things that we all ingest and your teenagers may be even experimenting with, and the effects that can have on sleep. Caffeine's a big one. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I don't have a cup of coffee in the morning and a cup of tea in the afternoon, because I absolutely do. Everybody is slightly different. We all process caffeine slightly differently, but it can take up to 10 hours for caffeine to come out of our system. So if your teenager is maybe grabbing a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or even one of those energy drinks in the mid-afternoon because of their cortisol dip, and they are one of those people that's sensitive to caffeine, and then they're trying to go to bed at 10 o'clock, they're not going to be able to, because that caffeine will still be in their system. It will be keeping them awake, it will be producing cortisol, and they'll not have an easy time of it. If they finally do have that mid-afternoon slump, they're much better to go for a walk and get some exercise. I always say that post-lunch is the worst time to have something like double maths. You're much better to have PE after lunch, because that'll just get you through that cortisol dip without needing to go for caffeine. Sugar has a similar effect. It's quite stimulating. It makes us produce insulin, and if we have it too close to bedtime, we are going to feel unable to get to sleep. So anything that's very sugary or high carb just before bed is really something to avoid. Alcohol, I know a lot of adults will say, oh, I have a wee drink before bed because it helps me get to sleep, which it probably does. Because of the nature of it, it will make you feel sleepy, but you don't have good quality sleep. You're more likely to have to wake up to go to the loo in the middle of the night, and you don't get all of your sleep stages if you're drinking alcohol before bed. And thinking about tobacco as well, any sort of tobacco products, cigarettes, patches, tobacco is a stimulant, so again, it'll keep us awake, and it's just worth thinking about if anyone in the house smokes, that even that could have an effect, stimulating effect on your teenager and their ability to get to sleep. So that's all the sciencey stuff I want to talk about. That's all the sleep, how it works stuff. And the reason I go through that is so you understand why we make the suggestions we make. So then when you're talking to your teenager, you can say, look, this is because we need to set your body clock, or this is because we need to think about your cortisol levels and your melatonin levels. Hopefully that all made sense. If there are any questions about that first bit, though, do pop them in the Q&A and we can have a look at them towards the end. So this is the reason you're all really here, is what can we do about it? How can we get a good night's sleep? So first of all, hopefully it's perfectly clear that we can't just think about bedtime. We have to think about the whole day when we're thinking about sleep. So one of the first things you should do first thing in the morning is get out into natural light for at least half an hour as soon as you can. I'm aware we live in Scotland. It's not always possible. The weather isn't always suitable for it, and the time of year isn't always suitable for it. So actually, if there isn't a lot of natural light, even the light on in your home, switching the main light on can be a nice big burst of light to your eyes, tells your brain it's time to wake up. If your teenager struggles to wake up in the morning, even putting the lights on in their room can help, because our brain can take in blue light from the light in your home, even with the eyelids closed. So getting that nice burst of light first thing in the morning can help set the body clock, tell the brain it's time to be awake. We often, as parents, think we don't need to worry about naps once they've got past about 2.5. Naps can be really detrimental to our sleep once we get a little bit older. If your teenager maybe comes home from school and then goes to do their homework in their bedroom, and then you find them 40 minutes later and they're asleep, just lying on their bed having a sleep, that's going to have a huge impact on their ability to sleep later on. What we've done is essentially relieved some of the sleep pressure that's built up, that's helping us feel tired at night time. So for every sort of 20 minutes after 3 o'clock that we have a sleep, it's going to push back that melatonin release by up to an hour. So if your teenager is coming home and having a wee sleep or falling asleep in front of the TV in the afternoon, try and cut it out. Again, going for a walk, doing something active, doing something engaging can just push through that little bit of sleepiness, and then it'll be much easier to get to sleep come bedtime. We obviously want plenty of exercise and activity during the day. Again, makes us feel tired later on, and it's generally good for us to be active and engaged. We need it through the day for our brain and our body to be ready for sleep later on. And that regular routine is essential. It can be a little bit harder to encourage our teenagers to want to follow a good routine, especially if they feel like maybe their friends aren't doing it, they don't see other people doing it. So a lot of the time it's a bit of negotiation, a bit of discussion, a bit of, well, what are the reasons why you might want to get a good night's sleep, trying to find their motivation. There's also a certain element of, well, is anyone else in the family doing it? I sometimes talk to parents and they don't realise that actually they're sitting on their phone while they're telling their child to go to bed. And actually, if everybody agreed that, well, we're going to do something else instead of being on our screens in the run up to bedtime, not all teenagers want to spend time with their parents. I totally get that. But it can be a way of just encouraging them to want to get involved. And even if you can convince them to try it for a few weeks and see how they feel, they might find that they feel a bit better, and then actually they want to continue. Thinking about the evening, obviously want to have a bit of dinner, not too close to bedtime because we're thinking about those sugar levels. Keeping our stimulating activities for earlier in the evening, so not just things like video games and social media chat, but also thinking about cardio exercise, strength-based exercise, so yoga, weights, that kind of thing is actually quite good later on because it helps bring our cortisol levels down. It's quite relaxing, but I wouldn't recommend things like going for a run later on in the evening because that just really stimulates the cortisol levels and keeps us awake. And also that dreaded homework. If they're doing their homework too late and then they're feeling quite stressed about it, it's going to keep their brain active, it's going to keep their brain going. They might need some alternative suggestions for screen use. The number of teenagers I've worked with and I've said to them, what else do you like to do? And they genuinely can't tell me. And that seems to have gotten worse over the last sort of 18 months because a lot of the things they maybe used to do, they can't do because we've had a pandemic going on and they've not been able to engage in after school clubs. They've not been able to engage with their other activities they might have done with friends. So having a few suggestions in your back pocket about that they might be able to do in the home during the evening, anything that involves sort of hand-to-eye coordination is really good for relaxing us. It might be that they're interested in doing strength-based exercises. It might be they like reading, listening to music, drawing, colouring in. having a few ideas when you're talking to them can just help prompt them to actually, this is what I'd like to do. But the important thing is what we're doing is starting to prepare for the change between the busy active day and the calm quiet night ahead of the last hour, which is our wind down hour. So it takes about an hour for our cortisol levels to dip and our melatonin levels to peak for us to feel sleepy. So consistency is key. That last hour before bed actually should be a very set routine. We do it when they're babies and we do it when they're very young, of having, oh, we have their bedtime routine of they do this and they do this and this, and then they have their little activity, and then they have their supper, and then they have their bath, and then they have their story, and then they go to bed, and they do that every single night. Actually, our teenagers should do this. Actually, we should do this as adults as well. If I'm having a few nights of bad sleep, the first thing I'll do the next night is get my screens off an hour before bed. I'll have a bath, I'll read my book, and I'm out like a light. So it really does work for all of us. Switching off those screens, swapping it for a quiet activity. It should never be a turn off your screens and that's it. Actually, it should be an exchange of something. Let's play this card game instead. Do you want to read something? Should we listen to some music together? You know, thinking of something that you can swap it for. So it's not just I'm taking something away, it's we're just going to swap it for something else. A relaxing bath can really help. So as we saw in that graph, what we needed was our body temperature dips, and that prompts the release of melatonin. And actually having a warm bath and then getting out of the warm bath into a cooler room causes a body temperature dip, and basically it sends that signal to the brain. It forces the signal to the brain of, oh, it's nighttime because I've had that temperature change, time to feel sleepy, let's produce some melatonin. Not everyone likes baths, but if they do, if they find baths relaxing, having a warm bath, not too hot, maybe even a bit of lavender, that can be quite nice. And sticking as closely to that bedtime and getting up times, even at the weekends, even in the summer holidays. No, I'm not very popular when I say that, but it's true. We're trying to avoid that jet lag. Once your body clock's set, you can probably push it by about an hour, but any more than that, that's when you might start to struggle. And then we need to think about the bedroom itself. So this, I'm aware this is like the craziest picture because nobody's had a TV like that since about 1987, but I keep it because I think it's kind of fun. But we're thinking about, we want it to be dark, we want it to be quiet, we don't want lots of electronics everywhere. We actually want it to be quite tidy, because there's research that shows that if our room is tidy, we feel more relaxed and it's easier to sleep. Obviously, we want to avoid the sugar, we want to avoid the caffeine. I can't imagine there's many of you that don't have curtains and blackout blinds up in Aberdeen, but making sure those curtains are shut at night, it not only keeps out light, but it keeps out noise, and having a bedside lamp rather than a big main light can just really be useful. The routine itself, this is just an example, everybody's slightly different, but this teenager, they have their evening meal, and then they'll have a bit of active time when they can do their more exciting things, more interesting things. They might have a bit of supper if they are particularly hungry. Our growing teenagers quite often do get eating you out of house and home, I can imagine. So having that time actually can be quite useful. And then the hour before bed, we're starting the wind down. Some sort of quiet activity, depending on what they like doing. Have a bath, maybe read, listen to music. Audiobooks are also quite a good one. Preferably on something where they're not having to look at the phone, because then the notifications come on. Or if they have a mode, they can set it where the notifications get switched off, so they're not going to get distracted by social media telling them somebody's liked something or commented on something. And then lights out. If your teenager, as many do, struggles to drop off to sleep, I always say one of the worst things for getting to sleep is stressing about not being able to get to sleep, because the last thing you're ever going to be able to do is then get to sleep, because all you're doing is raising your cortisol levels, and your cortisol tells your brain it's time to be awake. I'm stressed, I should be awake. So thinking about something to relax in the bedtime routine can really help. The quiet activity, if it has hand-to-eye coordination, as I said, can be quite relaxing, bring those cortisol levels down. Our granny would always say, have some warm milk before bed, that'll help you sleep. It's actually true. Warming milk releases an amino acid called tryptophan, helps us feel relaxed, and also helps with that melatonin production. obviously not too much. You don't want to be drinking a pint of it or anything. And if they say, I don't like warm milk, I'm going to put chocolate in it, well, that's not going to help because that's going to be full of sugar and caffeine. But if they will drink warm milk, that can help. Warm bath, as I've said. And then thinking about sort of relaxation or distraction techniques. So breathing exercises, mindfulness, body scan. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it takes practice to learn to relax. We don't naturally relax. So actually you might have to try several things with your teenager before they find the thing that works for them. And I'd also suggest trying it out during the day so they can practice it. And then when it gets to bed, they know what they're doing already, and they're not lying in bed going, oh, what was that thing that Mum said I should do? Oh, what was that thing that I was reading about? I can't remember. I better go get my phone and find it. And then we're just adding stress to their evening. And if all else fails, even counting sheep can work. It's boring, it's repetitive, you don't have to worry about it too much. Something like that can actually really help you drift off to sleep. I have a colleague who swears by the alphabet game, where she tries to think of a boy's name with every letter of the alphabet, and usually by about J or K, she's fallen back off to sleep. She said that's a good one for if you wake in the night as well. So it's worth just having a wee look. If your teenager is really struggling with sleep, please feel free to drop our support line an email and we can provide you with some individual support. That's for any child. They don't have to have a disability or an additional support need. Any young person right up to their 19th birthday, as long as they're over 18 months old, we can give you some advice. And then my last thing is just some of the other questions that were put to us in advance, and if there are any more you want to put in the Q&A, please do. Why do children have more sleep issues than previous generations? I love this. This is a great question. A whole host of reasons. We think a lot of it has to do with technology, access to technology, access to streaming services run through the night. We don't have, the TV used to switch off and they just didn't, there was nothing else to watch. All social media, phones, access to all these kind of things really do have an impact. The CEO of a very famous streaming service, which I won't name and shame, but I'm sure you could find it if you did a search, said that the biggest competition to their service was sleep. So they're actively trying to stop your teenager from sleeping. There's just so many things out there. These video games companies have psychologists working for them to make their games more addictive, to make them not want to stop playing them. So actually there's a whole host of things that are against your child getting to sleep. Why does my child grind their teeth? So there actually could be a few different reasons. Some children, it can be stress or anxiety related. If your child snores, that can also be a reason for them to grind their teeth. What I would suggest is actually just going to speak to the dentist and getting them just to check out, because if a child grinds their teeth quite a lot, it can actually cause headaches and pain in their head and their neck, and it might be they need a gum shield. And if they do snore, I would always get that checked out just in case it is something that could be resolved for them. Can I ask about bedwetting? I won't go into too much because time's quite short and it is quite a big topic, but essentially if your teenager or your preteen is still wetting the bed, you should probably seek some medical advice for it. Once children are past sort of 5 years old, if they're still wetting the bed, or have they started wetting the bed again, if you don't, it could be a long-term issue for them. Often young people start wetting the bed because of stress, anxiety, something big's happened, house move, divorce, something's happening at school, but it's worth investigating. There's a really great charity called ERIC, who used to be called the Children's Bladder and Bowel Charity, and they have some really good resources for teenagers specifically. And if you speak to your GP, see if you can get a referral to an enuresis clinic. So that would be my advice on that one. And then there was another one about sort of sensory issues. So if you have a child who does have sensory issues, everything I've said is relevant, but you do have to consider how you put it in place. So if your child doesn't like the feel of water, you wouldn't have a bath before bed. If they find the bath very stimulating, you wouldn't have a bath before bed. If they don't like lots of noise, you might want to think about maybe even like white noise, so they can block out the noise around that's in the house. Or if they don't like silence, that could be useful. The BBC have some 8-hour noise clips. They've got like white noise, pink noise. They've got one that just sounds like a car being driven, and it's 8 hours long, so it can just go through the night, and hopefully that will help them drift off and stay asleep. And thinking about textures, so if they find that pajamas just irritate them, and maybe changing the texture. If they want to be held, maybe some heavy bedding can help them feel like they're being enclosed a little bit more. But again, I would just contact our service and get some one-to-one support if you can. So that was all of them. I've just about slightly run over what I said I was going to do, but thank you very much. Are there any other questions that have come up in the Q&A?
Yeah, there are a couple. Oh, I
can hear feedback of my voice.
That's not nice. So one was around napping, but I think you answered that just after that one came through, so I think that one's okay. And the second one was, are late teas a problem? We often don't eat evening meal until 8 p.m.
It depends what time you're going to bed. I think 8 p.m. is quite standard for a lot of people. If they're not going to bed till 10 o'clock, then that's usually fine. What you might want to avoid is really sort of sugary desserts would be the only thing I'd think about, just in case that is giving a big sort of sugar rush. But otherwise, unless you're trying to then go to bed at 8:30, then I don't think that's really a problem.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Alison, for your time tonight. I've learned lots. I've got 3 teenagers in my house, so you've given me lots of tips and just things to reinforce and to kind of stay strong around. So I just really want to thank you very much for that. For our attendees that have come tonight, again, please go to the Sleep Scotland email address, or if you've got some other questions that you'd like to direct to ourselves, then we can pass them on to perhaps local sleep practitioners in Aberdeen. We've got quite a few people trained in our schools and in our family learning service, so we'd be happy to signpost you to local people that could maybe have a face-to-face chat with you. So we just want to thank you once again, Alison, for your time, and really appreciate what you've shared tonight. Thanks very much.